All right, welcome everybody to part 2 of searching for Maimonides Moshiach. Maimonides Moshiach in particular is who we're after. And we're going to start today. Just while I bring up my sources on the screen, I'd like to walk you through and just show you the Sefaria app, which is an invaluable resource for anybody who is interested in Torah study, whether or not you are familiar with Hebrew or Aramaic, because most of the materials are translated into English. But hold on, let me start share. We are going to here. We are going to share. Okay, so this is the opening page of the Sefaria website, a living library of Jewish texts. And they ask you, do you want to start at the beginning, which is the beginning of Genesis? Nah, I'm just going to X that out. So here's how it's organized. You have Tanakh, which is Bible, Mishnah and Talmud, which combined make the Gemara, or actually Mishnah and Gemara combined make the Talmud, Midrash, Halacha, Kabbalah, liturgy, like various Nusachim and things to do with prayer, philosophy. There's even more. Tannaitic material, Chasidus, Musar, Responsa, questions and answers, Apocrypha, which are books that weren't included in the Bible but are from the same period or something. It's a complicated subject. Modern works, I have no idea what that is, nor do I know what references. I've never used those sections, but you see how it's laid out. So for example, if you go to Tanakh, it'll show you the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and for that matter, the Targum and commentaries. And many of these are translated into English. So for example, if I wanted to take a look at this week's Torah portion, I would go to Numbers. I'd go up here to Numbers. I'd select Parsha, because I don't know what chapter the Torah portion is, but I know what Parsha it is. It's Parshas Korach. And then I could look at any of the 7 aliyos in Parshas Korach. Let's just go to the first. And you can see here that I have it set up, right up in the top right here. I have it set up for Hebrew and English. So the English translation is right below it. This is already a great resource, but there's more. There are many other commentaries available, some of which can be placed into the text, can be superimposed into the text. So that was Tanakh. You take a look at the Mishnah. We've got the orders of the Mishnah, Zera'im, Moed, Nashim, Nezikim, Kodshim, and Taros, the various sections of Mishnah. Let's go back again. And you got the Talmud, more or less the same thing. Midrash, let's take a look at Halacha, which is where we're going anyway. So in Halacha, the big ones they have up front are these 10 selections, although, as you can see, they've got many, 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 many other options and opportunities for studying Halacha. But up here, you got the big ones. The Mishnah Torah, Maimonides Yad HaChazaka, Maimonides Code, which is what we'll be studying today. Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. Chafetz Chaim, the works of the Chafetz Chaim in particular, works on prayer and on Lashon Hara. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the bane of every middle school yeshiva student, or at least it used to be. I don't even know if they study it that much anymore, at least not in modern places. Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch takes all of the mitzvos that are outlined by Maimonides, the 613 mitzvos, and he gives you the sources and the reasons. He elaborates on them in greater detail. We're actually going to be starting to study Maimonides' list of positive and negative Torah commandments tomorrow. You'll actually be getting an email about that. The Shabbos Epistle, Treasures Hidden in the Sand. I do not know what either of these works are. The Abu Dran, which is a famous commentary, halachic commentary. Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan is a very, very interesting authority, and Avodas HaKodesh. Anyway, you see how it's laid out. We're going to the Mishnah Torah. And introduction, Sefer Mata, Sefer Ava. We're going all the way to the bottom. Not to the commentaries bottom, but to Sefer Shoftim, the book about judges, which basically is about how the authority structure is set up in Judaism. And in particular, we're interested in kings and wars. And in particular, we've been studying about the Messiah. So let's go to chapter 11. We'll do a quick run through of the things that we talked about already. All right, so in the first law in chapter 11, we're told that the King Messiah will reestablish the monarchy of David as it was in former times. He will build the sanctuary and gather in the dispersed of Israel. All the earlier statutes will be restored as they once were. Sacrifices will be offered. The sabbatical and jubilee years will be observed as commanded in the Torah. Okay? What's the source for all of this? After all, the Bible speaks about many, many more issues to do with the Messiah. Basically, as we said last week, Maimonides' source for understanding what the requirements of the Messiah is are based on Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba rebellion, 132 to 135 of the Common Era. The Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was led by Bar Kokhba, was, to say the least, supported. It was basically also led by Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva believed, as did many of the other rabbis of his time, that Bar Kokhba was the Moshiach. Well, if they believed he was the Moshiach, then those things which he did are things which the Moshiach must do, and those things which he didn't do are not things that the Moshiach has to do. Right? We talked about this last week. And in fact, during the time of Bar Kokhba, we see that the monarchy was reestablished. Bar Kokhba was descended from the house of David. He built at least some form of the sanctuary. We discussed this last week. Gathered in the dispersed of Israel, people did come from all over to join the rebellion. All the earlier statutes were restored. It was, at least publicly, it was a religious state. Sacrifices were offered. At least the Korban Pesach was offered. The sabbatical and jubilee year were observed. Okay, so basically, if somebody does these things, then they're on their way to being the Messiah. There's still some more hurdles to be gotten over. Bar Kokhba didn't get over those later hurdles because of flaws in Bar Kokhba. He wasn't good enough, right? But minimally, he's got to do these things that Bar Kokhba did in order to be the Moshiach. Okay. Law 3 in chapter 11, it should not occur to you that the king Messiah must bring wondrous signs to perform marvels, or invent new things, or revive the dead, or anything like what the fools say. It is not so. For Rabbi Akiva, who was the wisest of the sages of the Mishnah, was King Ben Koziba's arm bearer. Okay, this is basically Maimonides telling you we're stuck with whatever Rabbi Akiva thought was good enough to be the Mashiach. Anything that he thought was good enough to be the Mashiach, that's what we think is good enough to be the Mashiach. Anything else, obviously, is not necessary, because otherwise Rabbi Akiva wouldn't have thought he was the Mashiach. Okay. Now, unfortunately, in Halacha 5, but if he does not succeed in these matters or is killed, we will know that he was not the one the Torah promised. More about that later. Now we're getting to a very fascinating section of these laws, which we did not get to last week. I saved it for this week. What you are reading in number 6 here, what you are reading in number 6, does not appear in almost all of the texts that we have. The printed text for sure, with one notable exception, does not appear in our Rambams. The reason for that is not because Rambam didn't write it. We know, in fact, that he did write it, as I'll explain shortly. The reason for that was effectively censorship. So I'm going to read you number 6, and then I'll give you the background of where it all came from, and we'll discuss its significance. Even Jesus the Nazarene, who imagined he would be the Messiah and was killed by the court, we'll talk about this more, was prophesied about by Daniel. Was there ever a greater impediment than, Daniel, who said, and also the children of the violent among your people will lift themselves up and establish the vision, but they shall stumble. Sounds like the Chaz zone to me. Anyway, was there ever a greater impediment than this one? All the prophets spoke of the Messiah, Redeemer of Israel, and Savior, and Gatherer of the exiles, and Strengthener of the commandments. But this one, Jesus, caused the ruin of Israel by the sword, and the dispersal of its remnant and its humiliation, and reversed the Torah, and caused most of the world to err and worship a God other than Hashem. I don't think we have to elaborate much here to understand why it is that printers who were printing in Christian countries were not allowed to print this paragraph. This paragraph, however, we know exists. It's printed, and it's here is based on the Frankel edition of the Rambam, which is a critical edition of the Rambam, which went back to Kisvei Yad. We have sources of original handwritten sources of the Rambam's book, and we know that this paragraph was in there and was later taken out. You know, critical sources, these types of critical source studies are very important because there are two types of things that tend to interfere tend to corrupt, I should say, tend to corrupt our texts. One thing that corrupts our text is just scribal error, right? Back in the day, I mean, not that it couldn't happen now, but back in the day, it was hand copying. So you got a lot of scribal errors. Scribal errors either because the scribe did a bad job, I don't know, he had ADD and he missed a word, or also what interestingly happened is that very often, what do you like that one? Interesting, what often it's been shown to happen in a number of cases is that somebody owned a manuscript and they decided, in their own chachma, they wrote a little something in the margin, a little note for themselves. And then the next copier assumed that what was in the margin was a correction. So he included that in the margin as well. There's a famous sugya in the Talmud that everybody breaks their head over. They can't seem to figure it out. Stretching, twisting, tumbling, any possible explanation. And what's the upshot of it all? The upshot of it all is that if you look at old manuscripts, you can see that the line that threw off the whole sugya, that threw off the whole topic, the line was it was added in by hand in the margin of a text. It wasn't originally in the text, and then it got copied over. So one source is scribal error, either because the text was corrupted or the scribe just did a bad job. Another reason why our texts have been corrupted is censorship, of which there was plenty. Certainly any references to Yeshu HaNotzri. There have been enough manuscripts recovered and enough studies done that there's actually a book published. I have a little copy of it, which will tell you all the things that were censored out of the Talmud. And there's some pretty interesting things. The Talmud wasn't as silent on certain subjects as it would seem. Anyway, so this paragraph about from Maimonides does not appear in his original version. Now you'll note that Maimonides here is not commenting at all on Muhammad. The reason Maimonides is not commenting on Muhammad is, for Maimonides, Islam wasn't avodah zarah anyway, so it's just a mistake. It's a whole topic in its own right. But reason number two is that probably wouldn't have been viewed so well by his, Maimonides was doctor to the Sultan. He had a relationship with many, many people in the Muslim community. Writing disparagingly about the Muslim community probably wouldn't have gone very well. However, we will see that in the next halacha, we'll see that Maimonides gives a great deal of credit, it turns out, to Islam and to Christianity. We'll see that in a moment. We're also going to come across another strange historical thing in a moment as well. So bear with us. So what do we got so far? And then I'll take a see. If anybody on Facebook who has questions, now's the time to type them in. And we should say as well, we said hi to Lois. We said hi to Ellie. Hi, Lori Stein. Glad to have you with us. And let's see who's here. Mark, how you doing? Glad to see that you're with us. Okay, if you got questions momentarily, that'll be the time to do so. So let's just review what we have up until here. Today, we've seen that Maimonides addresses the issue of the messianism of Jesus, and he says some interesting things, which we'll go into in a little bit greater detail momentarily. But again, what's fascinating is that I would say before 1980s, when the Frankel, I believe it's in the 80s that the Frankel Rambam comes out, almost no one saw this paragraph. It was unknown by and large to the world. We're going to meet another unknown shortly. Okay, questions, type them in if you got them on Facebook. Otherwise, I'm looking at you all here on Zoom. So if you got a question or a comment, it's welcome. Otherwise, we will proceed. We've got a lot of interesting things here to add on still. Okay, in the absence of questions at the moment, let's take a look again at this sixth halacha, this reappeared, once missing halacha in the Rambam. And you'll notice some very interesting things. First of all, Af Yeshua HaNotzri Shadima Shahaya Moshiach. I'm in the Hebrew for a reason. Even Jesus the Nazarene, who imagined he would be the Messiah, Venerag Bevestin, and was killed by the court. Now, this is a very, very, very interesting statement by Rambam, right? The Jews didn't kill Jesus. They turned him over, right? They turned him over. He claimed he was the Messiah. They turned him over, and then the Romans killed him. All right. Now, you'll notice that that is not what Rambam says. Historically, what Rambam says is, and again, I haven't studied this comprehensively, but I feel pretty confident to say that Jesus was not killed by Beis Din. He might have been turned over by Beis Din to the Romans for claiming he was the Messiah, but Beis Din did not kill him. Well, if that's the case, why is Rambam writing that he was killed in Beis Din? So obviously possibility number one is Maimonides thought he was killed in Beis Din. Okay, that's really not a good possibility. Maimonides pretty much, we have every reason to think, knew pretty much everything about everybody when it came to religion. Okay, however, there's a tremendous advantage to portraying, which there's some truth to. They turned him over for being a false Messiah. They said, you're not the Moshiach, and they turned him over. There is some advantage to Rambam claiming that Nerag Beis Din, that he was killed in Beis Din, because the mechanism for undisputably proving that someone is not the Messiah is for them to appear before the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin will condemn them as a false Messiah. So, for Maimonides, the halachist, who is always bound to halachic procedure, saying that Jesus was killed in Beis Din has strong halachic value in refuting any claims that Jesus was the Messiah of the Jews. Okay. Meanwhile, it's not all bad news. It's not all bad news that there's this Christianity thing, or for that matter, we'll see even Islam. Nonetheless, now we're in number 7. Nonetheless, the thoughts of the creator of the world are beyond any man's understanding. For our ways are not his ways, and our thoughts are not his thoughts. And all the doings of Jesus the Nazarene and that of the Ishmaelite, Muhammad, who came after him, are nothing but to pave the way for King Messiah and to prepare the entire world to worship God together. How is this so? The world is now already filled with matters of the Messiah and matters of the Torah and matters of the commandments. Knowledge of these matters has spread to the distant islands and to many nations of those with uncircumcised hearts. They discuss these matters and the commandments of the Torah. Some of them say that these commandments were once true, but have since been canceled for our time, as they were not meant to be observed for all generations. That's Christianity. Some of them say that these are secret matters and are not as simple as they would appear, and now the Messiah has come and revealed these secrets. But when the true King Messiah will rise and succeed, and he will be lifted up and raised aloft, they will all immediately return and will know that their fathers left them an erroneous legacy, and their fathers and prophets led them astray. What Maimonides is saying here is, all this talk about Christianity and Islam, it's paving the way for the Messiah, because Islam and Christianity have brought the ideas of monotheism and ethical monotheism and a messianic redemption and commandments of the Torah and the Word of God and the history of God. They brought these to all the other nations. They've spread it throughout the world. They're basically laying the groundwork for the future messianic redemption. This is Maimonides' position. Now, I should point out that this is not only a position held by Maimonides, but one of his great students held this position as well. I was actually exposed to it first in his writings before I saw the Frankel edition of Maimonides, and that is the Meiri. The Meiri, M-E-I-R-I, if you're looking it up on Wikipedia, Rav Yaakov HaMeiri, what's particularly fascinating about him is that his works were lost for 700 years. His works were unknown to anyone until, I believe, the 1920s. They had disappeared for about 600 years. He was a tremendous authority from Italy, a tremendous halakhic authority, and he, in his works, presents the same idea that, and by the way, following up on Rambam, Maimonides, he must have had Maimonides' real text, which, by the way, in Italy, they probably would have censored at the printing press, but he must have had the original text, because he says the same thing, that basically Christianity and Islam are paving the way in the world for a messianic redemption, for an era, the Meher V'Yameinu, of world peace, right? So they're paving the way for that. Meiri is an interesting case. Maybe I'll give a class on this sometime in the near future. He's an interesting case, not only because he got lost, OG, in history, and then he showed up 700 years later, but because the Meiri was an early authority of great, great stature, the question becomes whether his opinions on Jewish law, some of which were different than the direction that Jewish law went in many quarters, whether his opinion should be considered because the halachic world sort of moved on without him. So should we now go back and consider his opinions? It's a fascinating subject, not for this evening. Okay. Let's take a look at chapter 12. Just as a reminder, right, we said it should not occur that during the days of the Messiah, a single thing from the ways of the world will be canceled. The world will continue to function the way it always had. And we're in chapter 12, number 2. Our sages have said that there is no difference between this world and the days of the Messiah except our subservience to the kingdoms of the world alone. Basically, nobody's going to bother us. Imagine that. All right. And then there's some details about the Messiah is going to reaffirm people's genealogy to the sense of which tribe they're from, and be able to say this one's really a Kohen, this one's a Levi, this one's from Binyamin, this one's from there. Pretty impressive. And let's see. And at that time, there will be no famines and no wars. I believe this is the last halacha. This is literally the end of Maimonides' Code of Jewish Law. And at that time, there will be no famines and no wars, no envy and no competition. For the good, capitalized, will be very pervasive. All the delicacies will be as readily available as dust. The world will only be engaged in knowing God. Then there will be very wise people who will understand the deep-sealed matters. They will then achieve knowledge of the Creator to as high a degree as humanly possible. As it is said, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. B'mehera v'yameinu amen. We should only be so fortunate, speedily in our days, we should be so fortunate to have this redemption. If you got a question, Facebook, type it in, raise your hand over there. Otherwise, although this will probably mute a lot of questions, it's time to talk about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Complicated subject, or is it? All right, let's take a look here. Back in Maimonides, who, by the way, is the single greatest rabbinic authority in history, according to Lubavitch. Certainly since the time of the Mishnah. I mean, Maimonides has an unparalleled place after the Rebbeim and the Hasidic Rebbes of the forerunners. Maimonides is tops. Maimonides is part of their daily study routine. They love Maimonides. All right. Let's look at law number 1 about the Moshiach. The King Messiah will arise and reestablish the monarchy of David, as it was in former times. He will build the sanctuary and gather in the dispersed of Israel. All the earlier statutes will be restored as they once were. Sacrifices will be offered. The sabbatical and jubilee years will be observed as commanded in the Torah. Okay? Maimonides says, hey, remember the good old days with Bar Kokhba? That's what you got to have. In order to get off the ground on a claim of messianism, to get off the ground at all, you got to have this. So problem number 1 for the messianism of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, aside from the fact that he's not alive to continue to do his work, problem number 1 is that these things were not accomplished in his lifetime. Now, let me say, by way of context, I think it's fair to say that no one's done more for the Jewish people in the last half century than the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe has revolutionized Judaism in many ways. First of all, y'all with the Kiruv and all these guys out there doing Kiruv and bringing Jews back and going out there and trying to have organizations and have events and Kiruv events. This all started with Lubavitch. Let's not fool ourselves. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who, by the way, broke with generally Lubavitch tradition in order to do this, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, we have to reach out, and we have to reach out to the non-frum. You should know he had a lot of resistance within Lubavitch for this. Lubavitch, previous to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, which is what I mean by default, previous to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, their interest in mixing with non-Lubavitch, I should say non-Hasidim, and certainly non-frum people, would not be entirely different than the average Chassid that you come across in Spring Valley. They weren't into outside people. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, by the force of his personality and through over time his long tenure and his successes, the Lubavitcher Rebbe changed that. And he didn't just change it for people influenced by Lubavitch. Love it, Morty. Didn't only change it for people in Lubavitch, the Lubavitcher Rebbe changes for everybody. The Lubavitcher Rebbe changes for everybody. Eli, I'll come back to your question. Eli Eggenberg, I'll come back to your question later. Not now. So Kiruv basically is a Lubavitch institution. The fact that Jews, after moving everywhere on the planet, nowhere near synagogues, nowhere near Jewish communities, the fact that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, through his vision of creating shlichim and sending them out everywhere, ufaratzta, right? Through his vision, he sent rabbis and Jewish life to all the places that Jews went to get away from rabbis and Jewish life. And not only that, but his followers have managed to do it with sweetness and a smile, which is why they're so successful. Sweetness and a smile. Imagine that. That's almost a Lubavitch. It's almost a Lubavitch Chiddush all by itself. Sweetness and smiling to non-frum Jews. So you have the Lubavitcher Rebbe unquestionably accomplished amazing, amazing things. What the Lubavitcher Rebbe did not accomplish was, at least in the worldview of Maimonides, who, again, ironically, is the number one in the world of, he's tops. He's in the pantheon of Lubavitch. According to the Rambam, there's no way the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the Moshiach, unless when he comes back, he'll finish the job. Okay, that could be, but Maimonides makes, there's nothing here in Maimonides that seems to indicate that. There is a Gemara. It's a subject for, I guess, a more in-depth discussion about the messianism of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, or I should say, the messianics around the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's a little bit more of a discussion, but there is a Gemara which asks, who's the Moshiach? Like, who's he like? Like, give me people who, really, they were great. They didn't become the Moshiach, but they were great. Different people give different examples, including somebody gives an example of somebody who, somebody back then, somebody who died already, right? That would be an example of somebody who could be Moshiach. Now, could be and was are very different. And building out of that alone, the idea that somebody who died already could be considered the Moshiach is quite a stretch. So unfortunately, despite all the good things which Lubavitcher Rebbe and Lubavitch Hasidim have done, Lubavitcher Rebbe is not Moshiach. It just doesn't, we have a definition. There's a standing definition, standing criteria. The idea that the Messiah can die and come back to life, built off of a very limited Talmudic reference, is not only disturbing to members of the halachic community who reject Lubavitch, but more than just disturbing to members of that community, it's alarming to them because, and we all know this happened as well, various Christian groups grabbed onto this idea. Look, even the Jews, there are Jews who believe that the Messiah can die and come back. Okay, this is not really healthy for the team. The reality is that unfortunately, hold on, let me mute that person. The reality is that somebody's, there we go, I'm going to mute you. The reality is, unfortunately, that the Rebbe was not Moshiach. Okay? The Rebbe was not Moshiach. Now, there are halachists, and in particular, by the way, people who are Maimonides Maimonides central halachis, really Maimonides type people, who go so far, ironically, go so far as to claim that this anyone who holds the proposition that the Rebbe is Moshiach is not Bikoros, or they're a heretic, or they're outside the bounds. Personally, I don't see that. I don't really understand that. But nonetheless, there are some people who say that, and they say that because, listen, Maimonides makes it clear what the requirements are. You're going around changing the requirements and claiming that this person is the Moshiach. He doesn't meet the tenets. It's a false Messiah. Believing in a false Messiah, therefore, places you outside the halacha community. There are people who say such things. I am certainly not one of them. I don't agree with them. But there are people who say such things. So we should be aware. Okay, we're going to take some questions and comments. First, I just want to go back to Eli Eggenberg's earlier questions. When Maimonides says in the Messianic era that delicacies will be available like dust, what he's basically saying is that money is irrelevant. Money will be irrelevant. So anybody can have anything. This idea that money is going to be irrelevant because there's going to be worldwide plenty and worldwide bounty is reflected in other areas as well, but becomes part of the Maimonidean sort of world to come view is that there's going to be this world of ceaseless plenty. All right. Fission energy could probably do that, but I'm not the scientist in the house. Okay, questions. Do we have any questions or comments? If you are on Zoom and you want to ask a question or comment, I'm going to just unmute everybody, just in case there's somebody lingering who would like to ask a question now. You ask, how do you unmute everyone? I'm not exactly sure. Working on it. Let's go. Unmute. Let's see. Ask to unmute. We're making progress. He doesn't want to know from that. He doesn't want to know from that. He doesn't give me the option. No, they don't give me the option of muting or unmuting, so they definitely don't want to participate. And up here. Okay. Very good. So let's conclude. A couple of concluding remarks. One of the clearest upshots of Maimonides' view of the Messiah is that the Messianic age is a very natural happening. The world will continue according to its order. It's not going to be anything miraculous going on. Everything that's discussed to be miracles is really analogies. The lamb will lie down with the lion. Sorry, I'm misquoting the verse, but you know what I'm saying. Right, these are all analogous of what the situation will be in the Messianic era. For Maimonides, and this is a challenging thing to keep in mind as we say, oh, we want Moshiach now. Let me remind you that if you want Moshiach now, this is what the state of Israel will look like. The King Messiah will arise and reestablish the monarchy of David. It would probably be good if we got rid of this parliamentary system anyway, so I'm not going to complain about that. Right, Morty? He will build the sanctuary, okay? Gather in the dispersed of Israel. You know, if the current situation in the United States doesn't drive us all there anyway. All the earlier statutes will be restored as they once were. Whoa, it's a religious state. Sacrifices will be offered. Sabbatical and the animal rights people will go crazy. The sabbatical and jubilee years will be observed. Good luck with the Shomer Hatzair Kibbutzim with that one, as commanded in the Torah. So just keep in mind that when we all go clamoring, we want Mashiach now, the reason why you don't hear some of that you don't hear a lot of that outside of Orthodox circles is because the Messiah is going to basically create a halachic Jewish state, a Jewish state whose vision is not shared universally across the Jewish people. So, when we all need to keep in mind that the Messianic era, as described at least by Maimonides, and exactly how it's going to go down in sort of that Bar Kokhba way that it went down, Rabbi Akiva way it went down, we should all keep in mind that it's not going to be the easiest situation. Right? It's hard to imagine what the liberal Jewish world would feel about a Maimonidean Rabbi Akiva Bar Kokhba type Messianic era and state of Israel. And let me respond to another question, and then I'll make one last comment. So we have a question: could the Rebbe be the Moshiach but unrevealed, and another vessel will be born but have the Rebbe's soul? I'll say that again. The unrevealed thing is novel, a novel idea at best. However, the second thing which you mentioned, which is that the soul of Bavitcher Rebbe will somehow end up in somebody else who will be the Mashiach, that's fair if you accept the transmigration of souls, if you accept Gilgulim, if you accept that there is this idea of reincarnation. Listen, I'm not particular. If the soul of the Messiah happened to be in the Bavitcher Rebbe first, Eziofi, it's a beautiful soul. Works for me. However, so I shouldn't say however, so you'll have person B, not the Rebbe. You'll have person B who happens to have the Rebbe's soul. That's fine. And person B does all these things. That'll work just fine. So I guess that's possible. These are extremely stretched explanations for somehow validating that the Moshiach, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was the Moshiach is again, these are significant stretches in these explanations. One last comment, if I may. Maimonides' Messiah is someone who is going to have to lead the Jewish people to build a country, build a state, do all the things that men and nations do. But men and nations, this nation will have a very different mission and a different focus, and it'll be God's nation, and it'll influence the world. It's all well and good. But one point I want to make about this is, it's very clear from Maimonides that if you're waiting around for the Messiah to heal global warming, or you're waiting around for the Messiah to fix poverty, or you're waiting around for the Messiah to somehow or other miraculously fix all the problems of the world, it's just not how it's going to go down. In Maimonides' Messiah, the only difference, again, I call your attention, the only difference in the world and the way the world functions is that we'll be left in peace. Everybody will recognize, hey, good people, leave them alone, let them do their thing. Okay? It's not going to somehow or other solve disease in and of itself, solve hunger in and of itself, solve global problems in and of themselves. That's not what the Messiah is going to do. We still have a lot of work to do. We rank and file people. And I don't just mean the Jewish people, the world is still going to have to solve its own problems. It's just going to have a tremendous advantage in getting that done, because there will be a model nation, a moral nation, and as we now know, a nation that is technologically, in terms of its technological accomplishments and its vision and its desire to help the world, all things which Israel does above and beyond per capita of any other nation in the world by far and large, right? So we'll have a nice head start. We're good people, and we'll work with everybody else, and we'll solve the world's problems. But for Maimonides, human agency is still going to be required in the time of the Messiah, because the Messiah is a human being. He's a human being. He's a king. He's a king who accomplishes great things and restores things. But at the end of the day, he's a human being. He's going to die. And there'll be a next king who will be the Moshiach, will be the anointed one of the Jewish people, and will continue the line of King David on and on. This, idea of a messianic age where all of a sudden everybody's going to be like, wow, everything's great. This is not the messianic vision of Maimonides. And for that matter, really differs from a lot of other opinions about what the Messiah, who the Messiah was, what it could be. There are other opinions out there which disagree and say that the Messiah, in fact, in the Messianic age, things will be different. They take these verses more literally, but this is not Maimonides. And again, just to conclude, I remind you that the reason why this is not Maimonides is significant. Maimonides is the ultimate halachist, and therefore the follower of Rabbi Akiva, has to bound himself to a Messiah who only does the things that Bar Kokhba did. Okay. And a few things Bar Kokhba didn't get done later on. But when designating who is the Messiah and pointing to a person and saying, I think that's the Messiah, that person doesn't have to do anything miraculous. That's not Maimonides' Messiah, even though many other sources disagreed. And I'll finish by pointing out, just to connect this in the line of Jewish history, not only to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but to others. One of the objections to the study of Kabbalah after the failed messianism of Shabtai Tzvi, one of the objections was that Shabtai Tzvi used the Kabbalah and used all sorts of secretive ideas, etc., to show that he was who he was, and there were supposed miracles, yada, 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 all this stuff which reflected not a Maimonidean view of the Messiah, but a Kabbalistic view of the Messiah. Therefore, after the disaster which devastated the worldwide Jewish community, the disaster of the failure of the messianism of Shabtai Tzvi, Kabbalah gets pushed underground for a long time. Kabbalah gets pushed underground. And the Maimonidean rationalists take control, basically, of European Jewish life for sure, not Sephardim as much. European Jewish life, they take control of that, and they suppress this Kabbalistic type view, and Kabbalah in general gets suppressed. And this is why Hasidus, when it arises, Hasidus repopularizes a more, I would say, simplified or more, basically a more component-driven Kabbalah, whatever that is, right? They came back. They brought Kabbalah back. Hasidus brought Kabbalah back. Where did it go? After Shabtai Tzvi. Why did it go underground after Shabtai Tzvi? Because its vision of the Messiah allowed people to make all sorts of claims that they're the Messiah, based on things that were recorded in the Kabbalah and in other sources. They were able to make some claims. No. Maimonides is the authority. This is how it has to go. And this way we're not going to have any false messiahs, and we're just going to push the Kabbalah away. So Maimonides' view, the search for Maimonides' Messiah, really picks up after Shabtai Tzvi. Because before Shabtai Tzvi, there were numerous false messiahs. We gave a course on this. I have the recordings. If anybody wants them, let me know. Right? But there were numerous false messiahs, many false messiahs before Shabtai Tzvi. But finally, with Shabtai Tzvi and the use of Kabbalah, they shut it down. And basically, the approach became look for the Maimonides type of Messiah. Okay, let me see. Let's see, we got any questions over here? Ellie again, great. So will the rest of the world stop targeting the Jews when Moshiach comes? Yes. According to Maimonides, the answer to that is yes. According to everybody, the answer to that is yes. Once you get past the possible war with Gog and Magog and the conflicts that lead to the Messianic age, once the Messianic age is established, everybody's going to leave us alone. What will we do? I don't know. But everybody will leave us alone. It'll be okay. We'll figure it out. All right. Thank you all for being with us. We a couple of quick announcements. Say again,
right?
please.
Yeah. Or it seems so. So what did you hear? Hardly anything that I really, but I figured he sent an email.
Easy now. I can hear you. You don't know that I can hear you. Mute. Okay. All right. Just a couple of quick announcements that you should be aware of. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, online for morning service. Chazan will be back tomorrow evening at 6:45 for the evening service. Also, starting tomorrow, I'm going to be sending out daily 3 to 5 minute quick hitters, but reviewing Maimonides' list of the positive and negative commandments in the Torah as presented by the Chafetz Chaim with a couple of quick comments. We'll try to do a mitzvah every day. Which means it'll take a long time to get through the whole book, and that's okay. But we'll be sending those out several times a week, just to keep people, involved in Torah learning, even under these difficult circumstances. So that'll be starting on Wednesday. Next Tuesday night, in order to sort of try to pull the strings together, if you will, next Tuesday night, the class will be about how Maimonides determined which of the mitzvos in the Torah are in his list. And by the way, it turns out other people had different lists of which are the 613. Now, that doesn't mean that people disagreed on what's a mitzvah and what's not a mitzvah. There are actually well more than 613 commandments. Some of those commandments, however, only applied in the wilderness, or some of them only applied at a particular time. So therefore, they weren't counted in the list of 613, and different people had different rules. One of the great debates, really one of the ongoing great debates, was Maimonides made his list, then Nachmanides made his list, which is agreed with Maimonides' lists, and then you have furious debate amongst the commentators back and forth about this. So we'll take a look at how Maimonides came up with this list next Tuesday night. But in the interim, Wednesday, Thursday, then next week, we'll start to send out one mitzvah a day, starting tomorrow with the mitzvah to believe there is a God. Believe it or not everybody agrees that should be a mitzvah. We'll take a look at that tomorrow. Okay, folks, thanks for being with us. It's been great. We'll see you soon.